Welcome to the first part of our seven-part explainer series diving deep into Nāgārjuna's Acintyastava, or the Hymn to the Inconceivable Reality. Now, this explainer is designed specifically for advanced scholars of Madhyamaka, because I know you're all intimately familiar with the foundational mechanics of the tetralemma, dependent origination, emptiness, and the union of the two truths. We aren't going to waste time defining our terms today. We're jumping straight into the text itself. In this first part, we're focusing squarely on sections 1 through 3, which covers verses 1 through 16.
Okay, here is our game plan for today. We'll start with verses 1 and 2 teaching you two team, move into causation as convention, tackle the relativity of opposites, and then finally wrap up part 1. Let's get right into it.
Starting off with section 1, verses 1 and 2, teaching the union of the two truths. Right out of the gate in verse 1, notice how Nāgārjuna immediately establishes the union of the two truths, what we refer to as U2T. He totally frames dependent origination, which is T1, and emptiness, T2, as absolutely inseparable. He's praising the Dharmakaya, the inconceivable reality, but not as some mystical beyond. Instead, he's praising it precisely as the realization that everything dependently arisen fundamentally lacks own being.
And then we see this brilliantly illustrated U2T right in action. Verse 2 points out that the Buddhist realization of the emptiness of phenomena, that ultimate wisdom, or prajna, is completely, inextricably linked to boundless conventional compassion, or karuna. One doesn't negate the other, right? Realizing T2 actually necessitates the compassionate action of T1.
So here's the crucial takeaway. Nāgārjuna isn't just using devotional language for religious worship here. It's actually a super precise philosophical instrument. He's making the point that the Buddha's very nature is this non-dual union of wisdom and compassion. By bowing down, Nāgārjuna is literally bowing to the living embodiment of U2T. It's devotion serving dialectics.
Moving right along to section 2, causation as convention, covering verses 3 through 10.
Now, in verse 3, Nāgārjuna lays out his core thesis on causation. He states pretty explicitly that anything conditionally born is, by ultimate definition, unborn and lacking independent essence. I mean, think about it. If something requires conditions to arise, it literally can't possess an independent own being. Therefore, it is fundamentally empty. To kind of bypass the dry logic and point straight to the experiential reality of all this, verse 5 brings in these incredibly vivid poetic metaphors. As advanced Madhyamaka practitioners, you know these well. Illusions, mirages, cities of Gandharvas, reflections, dreams. Nāgārjuna is using these to remind us that empty, unborn phenomena still appear and function conventionally. They're there, yet not there. They arise like echoes in dependence on a sound. I absolutely love how verse 7 just throws down the gauntlet against reification. He calls the whole idea of inherently existent composite wholes a complete delusion. He actually calls it an empty fist used to trick the simple-minded. It's such a sharp, unmistakable critique of substantialist thinking that confuses our conventional map with the ultimate territory. But, of course, this sets up a classic rhetorical trap in verses 8 and 9. It's the ultimate substantialist objection, right? If a composite thing isn't inherently born and the cause ceases before the effect even happens, how can anything relate to an effect? This hooks us right into the heavy analytical lifting he does regarding the junction between cause and effect. Applying the logic of the tetralemma maps out exactly how verses 9 and 10 tackle that trap. You all recognize this at work here. Nāgārjuna rigorously negates every single absolute avenue for causation, whether that's self-origination, other origination, both or neither, as well as the extremes of existence, non-existence, both and neither. He dismantles these without throwing out their conventional everyday use. Basically, he proves that any attempt to inherently link cause and effect just crumbles under logical scrutiny. So, the big so what for this whole section on causation is that the arising of an effect is impossible to explain ultimately. The junction between cause and effect simply cannot be inherently established. It's purely an interdependent conventionality. Causation is a super useful map for sure, but as Nāgārjuna is constantly reminding us, the map is never the territory. Okay, let's jump into section 3, the relativity of opposites, covering verses 11 through 16. Right away in verse 11, we get a foundational Madhyamaka critique. The concepts of own being and other being are entirely correlative. They're completely co-imputed concepts. Nāgārjuna uses the analogy of the near shore and the far shore. You just can't have a near shore without a far shore, right? The identity of one is entirely dependent on the position of the other. So neither of them has inherent independent existence. And he follows this up with a brilliantly simple analogy in verse 12 to prove that existence in the conventional world is completely dependent on co-definition. You literally cannot have short without long, because their very identities require that relationship. Having inherently independent existence is just practically impossible.
Then, in verse 14, Nāgārjuna takes this relativity way beyond simple spatial dimensions like long and short. He starts applying it to all dualities, triads, and conceptual proliferations. We're talking unity and multiplicity, time itself, pure and impure, even true and false. He's making the case that these are all merely conventional tools, completely empty of any inherent standing. And then we get to verse 16, which delivers this devastating philosophical punchline. If self-nature absolutely requires an other, then clinging to some independent, reified, dependent nature is just absurd. He openly mocks this, calling it a literal seizure of materialism. It's such an aggressive critique of those who say they accept dependent origination, but are still secretly trying to sneak inherent existence through the back door of their philosophy. The crucial takeaway we need to lock in here is that all opposites, and really all phenomena, are mutually dependent, entirely empty of inherent existence, and merely imputed by the mind. Sure, they exist conventionally, but if you go looking for their true essence, the only thing you'll find is their relationship to something else.
Finally, section 4, concluding part 1 and looking at the journey so far.
We've really seen a masterful flow in these opening sections. I mean, he seamlessly transitioned from praising the Dharmakaya and the union of the two truths right into using the tetralemma and those vivid poetic metaphors to completely shatter our instinctual clinging to causality. And from there, he just systematically dismantled the dualistic identities and opposites that construct our conventional world. Which leaves us with this massive, provocative question to end on. If every map we use is ultimately empty, and all dualistic concepts are merely co-imputed mirages, how do we actually live? How do we actively practice that compassion Nāgārjuna was praising back in verse 2, while still trapped in this interconnected, illusory world? Well, keep that profound paradox in mind, because in our next explainer covering part 2, we're going to explore exactly how Nāgārjuna addresses the ignorance that binds us and the skillful means required to navigate the dream of samsara.